They want to see someone building something or doing something. It's like, take me on the journey with you. Typically, the biggest challenge for content creators is themselves. It doesn't matter how good you are. It matters who's showing up for the audience. If people discover you and they can't figure out how to describe you, they're going to forget you. Like, you need to be distinctive. People are starting to build reality shows around their businesses. People are starting to take you into their workplace. Employees of workplaces are now making content of what it's like to work in a company. If you inject a bit of sensationalism around the emotion behind what it is you're talking about, it makes it all that more attractive to share with others. The framework I use for this is there's kind of 7 key emotions that tend to get the most viral traction when you share content. And those 7 things are:
in today's episode of the Think Media Podcast, we're going to be learning some game-changing lessons from million-dollar personal brands and why most creators and entrepreneurs are fighting the wrong battles heading into 2025 and the hidden opportunities that 99% of personal brands are missing in the current landscape. We're also going to be learning the counterintuitive truth of why personal brands build trust 3 times faster than corporate brands, backed by real examples from our guests' work with Culture Kings and other iconic brands. Plus, he's going to be sharing his battle-tested 90-day framework for building your brand or your personal brand from scratch. And there's going to be so much more. Now, our guest today is Dain Walker. He's the CEO of the rapidly expanding digital media agency Rival. And he also is the author of 90-Day Brand Plan. And he's a global authority. He has built multiple different brands, consults with all kinds of different brands and personal brands, is really the go-to voice for entrepreneurs. And in our case, content creators. So this is your opportunity to get your brand right for your YouTube channel, for your social media presence, to get your personal brand dialed in for a new year. And there's going to be a lot of juicy nuggets in this masterclass. So I'm excited for what's coming up. Dain, welcome to the show.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me, dude, and excited to be here.
Yeah, as we dive in, I want to start off right with the 3 biggest enemies creators need to overcome for building a standout brand. Or really, what are the 3 changes? You know, we were just talking, the game is changing when it comes to branding and personal branding in a 2025 landscape. And we wrote a few things down. The first thing you said is, people are tired of talking head content. Expand on that. What's the bigger theme there?
Yeah, I think, for me, when it comes to talking head content, there's content creation comes in waves with personal brands, right? If you go back 5 years ago on Instagram in particular, carousels were the hot thing that was popping off. Now YouTube channels are finding that they're going to make shorts. They're going to make epic, introductory kind of promo videos at the start of their podcast. Everyone's just getting better and more fierce at what they're doing. And I think, just sitting down, turning the camera on and hitting record and talking is now getting kind of moved into a category where it's not taken seriously anymore. I think what people are looking for on channels in particular around entrepreneurship is they want to see someone building something or doing something. It's like, take me on the journey with you. The founder-led content is kind of a thing. It's like, okay, you're talking about what you can do, but show me, right? So people are starting to build reality shows around their businesses. People are starting to take you into their workplace. Employees of workplaces are now making content of what it's like to work in a company. So I just think that it's getting more competitive. More people are trying to enter the market. And you can't just, get in front of a camera and pretend you have a business anymore. People want to see proof and evidence that you're actually doing something substantial behind the scenes.
That kind of ties into number 2, where we do talk about market saturation. You're talking about you got to be good. What do you think has been kind of the different eras in a 2025 landscape? Is it too late to start, or what's the different approach that you got to have?
I never think it's too late to start. I think, there's people that are, haven't even started a channel yet that are going to dunk on you and I with views and attention and conversion, the likes that we've never seen, right? So there's a Mr. Beast out there that doesn't even have a channel yet. And I think what's interesting here is it's never too late to start. I think it's just how you start and where you start is always changing. One thing's certain in life, and that's that change is inevitable. Platforms are going to change, algorithms are going to change. And I hear this all the time. I talk to personal brands and content creators like, what I do kind of works, but it used to work a lot better. I'm like, change. They're like, but I liked it how it was. Get over it. I liked making carousels. Doesn't work anymore. Maneuver, change, evolve, do something else. I love Instagram. doesn't get the same reward that YouTube gives me now. Like, I'm moving on. So like, I'm still going to do Instagram, but I'm focusing on a different tactic. Like, we have to be agile and we have to maneuver. And I think the enemy is that, like, if you want to create, I guess, a battlefield scenario, the enemy is like the tides are changing, like the weather's changing. And I liken this in my book, like, if you look at social media or content creation, it's seasonal. There's going to be winters, there's going to be summers, there's going to be autumns, there's going to be springs. And you can't get down in the dumps when there's a drought and you're like, I'm not getting the views I used to get, I'm not getting the comments or the engagement I used to get, so therefore I'm going to slow down. Well, if you slow down, those that speed up in those hard times, produce more content, give more value, try to be more dynamic. When the season comes good again, the algorithm comes good again, the new wave, whatever that is, comes good again, those that are preparing in the winter are the ones that are going to do well in the springtime. So for me, I just think that when it comes to content creation, the enemy is like sometimes like people and themselves. But if you look externally, it's usually that there's saturation. Like, people are getting really good at creating content now, giving away value for free. Like, if you go onto Google, you can solve every problem you want to solve right now on YouTube and Google. What gives you the right to charge money to solve that problem? You don't have a license to have their money. What gives you a license is like, are you worthy of their attention? And I hear this all the time. People come up to me and I do workshops with clients. They're like, our content's good. I'm like, great, put it on social media. I don't want to sell it. Well, if it's really good, put it out there for free. Let's see if it's actually good or not. They're like, well, I don't want to give away my magic. I don't want to give away my best stuff. And it's like, well, if you give it away and they don't react to it, you need to create new stuff anyway. So I think that the social contract between creators and social media right now is they expect it to be really good for free. And there's a lot of people entering the market at the same time, trying to steal your lunch and eat it in front of you. So we have to get a lot better at creating content, because every time you create a piece of content, there's no more people on the social platform per se. There's no more people spending money in a particular market. Like, if you want to gain grounds as a creator, you have to take attention off other people. And that's why it's getting difficult, is because there's a lot of people out here that are really good at getting attention and you're showing up and trying to take it off them. So that's why you have to be better than ever.
Man, we're coming out swinging on the podcast with two themes already. I feel like we went 0 to 100 real quick. Theme of the podcast is Drake, do right and kill everything. And so number 3, though. So people are tired of talking head content, kind of like reinventing yourself, maybe doing show me what you're doing, like show me the behind the scenes, even reality shows or innovative new ways of doing content. Market saturation, you got to be good. And there's also seasons. So also, if you're getting prepared in the winter, then if you can outlast the competition, then you also can ride those various waves. And we're going to be unpacking that throughout this entire episode with a lot of tactics to help listeners, whether you're just starting or whether you're more advanced. And so those will be coming up. But we're talking about these 3 kind of big changes in branding and personal branding in 2025. And the third one is build a theme around yourself. Talk a little bit about that, and maybe also what you're building around yourself in general, maybe like structure and teams in regards to building a personal brand.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, so like feel free to nudge me around if need be. Yeah, I think themes are like when you're putting yourself in the market, people try to put you in a bucket. They try to label you, right? Like you might say, well, Seth Godin's the marketing guy, and Grant Cardone's the sales guy, and Tony Robbins is the guru. And, like we tend to put like these labels on these characters, even though they're more complex and nuanced than these things. It's like, Wim Hof is the breathing guy, right? David Goggins is the crazy guy with no shirt that's always yelling and running somewhere. Like we tend to simplify things. And if someone was to radically simplify you, what would they use to describe you? And if that's not what you want it to be, then how do you course correct that reaction to be what you want it to be? So for example, for a long time, I would go on podcasts and people would say, here's Dain, the Instagram guy. And I was like, God damn it. Like, I don't want to be the Instagram guy. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to be the brand guy. And I was like, well, what's giving my community and my interactions and my engagements the impression that I'm the Instagram guy? And I was like, oh, it says it in my bio. Oh, every title of every piece of content I make talks about Instagram this, Instagram that. I'm like, well, I'm throwing the language and the themes out there and they're picking up on it. So like, you need to control the narrative. Like, what are the themes that you're trying to own? Are you trying to own videographer? Are you trying to own story? Are you trying to own, creative? Are you trying to own branding strategy? Like, what's the thing you want to own? And you have to be conscious that you need to start putting monikers out there or putting labels out there in the zeitgeist for people to pick up on and go, okay, they're that thing. And the easiest way to test this is just, ask your community, like, hey, if you were to describe me in a sentence, how would you describe me? And just see what they say back. And go, okay, cool. I'm not mad at them for describing me the wrong way. It's my responsibility to adjust what they think my brand is. And I think coming back to the challenges, it's like, well, all these people are flooding the market and entering the market. Like, what should I do about it? Is it too late? Poor little me. The algorithm sucks. Like, am I blacklisted or shadow banned? When you dial it all the way back to its simplest form, typically the biggest challenge for content creators is themselves. Like, either a lack of self-esteem or a lack of personal belief that their stuff is any good, or I'm going to be judged, or I'm not ready yet because I need to buy all this equipment and have this background and yada, yada. I think just to keep it simple here, man, like if people could just realize that there's someone on the internet right now who has no idea about your industry and is like watching YouTube content that's going to start making content about your industry and get more viewers than you, even though you've been doing this thing that you've been doing for 4, 5, 10 years. It's like he who shows up and produces media gets the attention. It doesn't matter how good you are. And this is where the fallacy between people go, well, I'm better than that person. Why do they have attention and I don't? And it comes down to the equation of like, it doesn't matter how good you are. It matters who's showing up for the audience, who's showing up for the community consistently, giving them nourishment, going, hey, I'm here. Here's entertainment. Here's content. They're showing up with a great personality, great charm, great style, and they're able to romanticize their audience. Like, look at content like flirting. Content is you flirting with an audience. We might not know if we're going to do business in the future, right? We can't go straight to going to bed together. So if you look at the greats like Alex Hormozy, Gary Vee, David Goggins, Lewis Howes, Dan Martell, like whoever you're engaging with on social media, we're flirting with them. We're like, man, this guy's kind of interesting. I wonder what their story is. I wonder what they do. I wonder what their business looks like. You want to create a sense of like charisma and exchange, which we're starting a social contract together. You can't just go straight to the purchase. And I think too many people like produce social media content are only focused on, I need the leads, I need the sale outcome, rather than I got to learn how to have some riz. I got to learn how to create a bit of romance between me and the audience for them to want to hang out with me. And if they just want to hang out with me, I'll sell them stuff later.
Man, there's a lot in there. And one of my favorite things you said was also your biggest competition is yourself, because we could get so stuck in our heads and somebody else that's less talented, less prepared, maybe has less business acumen, less depth, but just more cavalier courage to just step out there and start recording might be getting the viewership. And I think sometimes we're guilty of watching somebody on the sidelines. We're sitting on the sidelines and being like, oh man, that's not even right, or picking them apart. Meanwhile, we're not taking action. And there's something about taking action, putting your content out there so you can at least be discovered. And man, we need a little riz and romance in our brands. Like we need a little bit, content's like flirting. So we really just hit these 3 kind of big themes that we can all apply going into 2025 and beyond. But I want to go a little bit deeper on that, because part of your content strategy is having 5 core themes. Is that true? Can you break this down, and then how we can maybe start identifying what that means? And what would you say if Grant Cardone is the sales guy? If, I wrote the book YouTube Secrets, if I think I'm the YouTube guy, well, that's only one theme. Who do you see that's building out, these different themes? And this kind of gets in that niche conversation where, do you get too pigeonholed if all you're talking, and now your brand, but what else are you? And how are people experiencing that? And then how can people follow along to develop a stronger brand as they're developing their 5 core themes?
That's a great question. I think like the core themes, and we talk about this in the book, essentially it's like you want to rotate around 5 different objective talking points, right? So like, for example, when I first started producing content on Instagram, my original themes were, hey, this is how to make content. This is how to design content. This is how to formulate content. This is how to brand your content. Like everything was about content, and it just pigeonholed me to be the content guy. So when people would DM me or reach out to go, hey, can you help me? It was always like, can you make my content for me? But my objective was I wanted to build their brand. I didn't want to make their content for them. So like what you create creates a reaction. So it's kind of like, okay, I plant this seed, the fruit I'm bearing isn't the fruit I want. I want a different fruit tree. So then I have to go plant something different. So the themes are kind of like you planting different, I guess, fruit trees in your vineyard to get a certain result that you want. The themes should certainly sit around the product suite that you offer. So when I started talking about brand strategy, brand identity, graphic design, logos, brand messaging, marketing and advertising, people started to DM me or go to my website and reach out and say, hey, can you help me with my branding? And it took a little while to get the stigma of being the content guy off and be focused on the. So you have to have themes that sit in the vernacular of what it is that you're trying to sell as a product or a service. But you want to give yourself enough variety that you don't run out of things to kind of divulge. And if something's not working, just swap it out. You know what I mean? I think people struggle to get clear on what it is that they do. So having 5 themes forces you to get clear because you could be clever, you could be charismatic, you can be cool, but if people land on your social channels and can't figure out what you do or why they should engage with you, it's very difficult for them to hit the follow button. So if you want them to hit the follow button and drop a comment and engage and pay attention, they need to understand, well, what the hell are you? Who are you? Why do you exist? Why should I care? What's in it for me? Stop talking about how great you are and start sharing with me what I get out of this relationship. We're in a social contract. We're romanticizing each other. You're romanticizing me. We're sharing our riz with each other. What do I get out of this contract? Because a lot of times when we talk to people about starting their social content, they're so focused on me, but they're not thinking about you, the audience, being of service. So the 5 key themes, it just gives you, I guess, a neighborhood to play in. Like just give yourself 5 topics. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And then what you'll notice is if hypothetically you post 30 pieces of content this month and you have 5 themes and you rotate what you talk about each day of the week, right? So then it's like today I talk about logos, tomorrow I talk about color psychology, the next day I talk about messaging, then I talk about strategy, then I talk about advertising. Then I go back to the start, do it all over again. That means you post 6 pieces of content per month, 1 on each theme. 6 pieces of content each month on each 5 of your 5 themes. And then you go back at the end of the month, you go, which themes resonated the most? And just look at the data. Like, every time I talk about color psychology, people go nuts and I get a ton of leads from it. Let me just talk about that a little bit more. Or let me try and find a theme that like supports that theme a little better. So I just start looking at the themes I talk about like I'm a day trader, like I'm an investor, like I'm investing in a theme today. Let me see what the ROI of that theme investment was today and at the end of the month. And then at the end of the month, what I used to do is just go, well, this theme doesn't do anything. I get no leads from it. No one comments. No one cares. I get no reshares, no engagement on that theme. Let's just kick that theme and put something else in that place. So I just would go back and forth with this with my clients until we can get a stack of themes that actually work for their social media channel.
What's your philosophy on niching down? If you look at like a Gary Vee case study, wine library and wine was a couple years, and then business content and social media. And then somebody today with a brand as big as his might be like, well, he's like, you are the niche. That's a quote that gets thrown around. And so it's like, it might be the Jets, it might still be wine, it might be NFTs and social and, anything in social marketing, commerce, online shopping, all this stuff. But he's Gary Vee, and Cardone, right, was niche sales and then real estate and then business, and they do like marriage conferences. So what's also maybe part of the journey, and I noticed your themes kind of orbit around a tip of the spear to cut through the noise. But I'm curious, for some, there's a big debate. Some people are like, you don't need to niche down. You're just the niche, talk about kind of whatever you want. And, in a YouTube context, not a lot of people break out doing that, but there's, 1 or 2 odd stories. And so some people think that's a way to go. If someone's trying to unpack, they're multi-passionate, are they trying to niche down and then pick 5 core themes? Or if they start day 1 and they're like, this is going to be my wine, sales, NFT, crypto, pickleball channel, that's the kind of 5 themes. Unpack that a little more.
Yeah, that's a great, I got like 4 ways I could unpack this. So yeah, like the whole thing around niching or niching, like niches get the riches kind of topic, right? Like I agree with Gary Vee, like you are your niche in some aspects, and I kind of challenge it on other aspects. So I think that's a radical oversimplification of a marketing strategy and a brand deployment potentially. Because I think the two things I go to, and let's just look at this maybe a little differently. So whether like shall thou niche or not, let's just put that on the shelf for now and just go, let's look at this a little bit differently. What I like to look at is like, so let's sit down. What does greatness look like for you in 5 years? Like, what are you building? Well, I want to build a company, or I want to do this, or I want to do, like, get clear on like, what is the Mount Everest that you're trying to climb? And this is a difficult question to answer because a lot of times when I sit down with people, especially when they're starting, they're like, I want to do this and that and this and that. And it's like, cool. But just like, if you had to be the best and you were really good at like one core business model, what would that predominant primary moneymaker be for you? For me, it's an agency. Right? I have a book, I have courses, I do seminars, I do this and that and all the rest of it, but I make my dough running a company. So that's like my Mount Everest, right? I like doing those other stuff, but these are all different camps up the mountain, right? But my Mount Everest that pays for all this other stuff is, running a company. So back to like, well, what is your Mount Everest? So like you need to figure out like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What does greatness look like? And look at the future. You need to like really cast yourself out there at least 5 years. Then come back into the present and be like, well, where am I now? Right? So at the beginning, I was like, I work at Telstra. I have a $200,000 debt. I'm depressed. I hate my job. I hate my boss. I hate what I do every day. My Mount Everest was like, hey, I wonder if I could build an agency, make $1 million a year and have 5 employees. That was my Mount Everest at the very beginning 6 years ago. And what you need to ask yourself is like, okay, if that's my Mount Everest and this is where I am now, there's one frame of thinking that you need to have, and it's split thinking, right? So I need to work from the current toward the future, and I need to work from the future back to now. I need to work from both ends, and I need to figure out like how this pathway leads up the mountain. And you can't just think current forward and future back. You need these two to kind of work synergistically together. Within that, what is that pathway? For me, it was like, I got to make content. I got to generate leads for this agency. But then I realized like no one cares about me and my Mount Everest. They care about themselves and their Mount Everest. So I was like, well, people are out here trying to, produce content and get attention. I'm going to start my pathway doing that. I realized early on that my pathway was kind of shitty, and I was like, I want a better pathway up this mountain. That's when I went and hopped into branding instead of talking about content creation. The point is, the niche is like, well, you're the character on the journey. And are you interesting? Are you charismatic? Do you have quirks and like interesting things that make you a human being, make you likable? Like, why do your friends hang out with you? There's something about you that they like. You're a character in their universe. You're a virtual character in a virtual universe for people you don't know, right? So back to the niche thing, I think where you can go wrong is if you try to be for everyone, quote unquote, right? So I see this all the time. I sit down in a workshop and I've sat down with billionaires, millionaires, startups, and I hear this all the time. I ask them, who's your target audience? And they say, well, Dain, our target audience is everyone. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Explain how that works. Well, we do this and we do that. I'm like, cool. Is it working? No. Well, I wonder why. Because if you try to speak to everyone, we're speaking to no one. Like, put 100 people in a room, try to get them to agree. Not happening. It's like herding cats. So for me, I guess to put a full stop on this is like, you have to be a unique character. You have to be you, and you have to be a human being, but you have to be clear on what your route to the top of the mountain is. And you have to build themes around that, because if people discover you and they can't figure out how to describe you, they're going to forget you. Like, you need to be distinctive. And if you look at Grant Cardone, and if you look at these characters, most big brands started off niche, right? Nike, we make shoes for people who run. And Phil Knight was making shoes with a waffle iron. And it was all about running. That was it. Like, you got to remember, like, oh, Nike sells shoes to everyone. No, they don't. They started off selling to runners. They crushed that category. They built brand equity, and then they line extended. They're like, if we can crush running, can we crush tennis? Can we move laterally into basketball and do the same thing? Well, yeah, because runners want to win. Basketball players want to win. Tennis players want to win. Well, let's speak to the part of the athlete that wants to win. So then they crush the athlete market. And they're like, well, athletes don't just want to win. Everyone wants to win. Everyone's an athlete. right? So Nike speaks to the part of you that wants greatness. So if you're trying to build a brand, you have to figure out what part of your audience are you speaking to. Are you speaking to their fired up part? Because a part of me likes David Goggins yelling at me, but another part of me likes Simon Sinek calmly talking to me. So there's different parts of me, and there's different personal brand options that speak to different parts of me. So what you have to realize is you have to niche to what part of the person are you speaking to, and you have to be clear about it.
Take that a little bit deeper before we go on. So is that like a tone aspect of your brand? Meaning like maybe, and this is like certainly the case. I know for me, I've gotten business advice from a lot of people. I've been to a lot of different business events, marketing advice from a lot of people. But you said if we're going to speak to a certain part of me, I also can learn from, call it that Grant Cardone energy. But that's probably not my favorite energy. And so there's others that bring it differently, but he's got a lot of wisdom on one side. So when that was like that final nugget you just dropped, sounds to me like tone. Is that what you're saying? Or can you expand on that?
Yeah, I'll expand on that a little bit. So like I think, like a lot of things make the whole. So there's a great book you can get on this, and the book's called No Bad Parts. And it talks about how human beings aren't essentially always one format, right? So at work, you might work in finance, you might be like rigid and task oriented and like super methodical about your day to day operation and what you do in your career. On the weekends, you don't give a shit about tasks, you don't have any plans, you just want to hang out, drink beer, and go to the beach and surf and figure it out as you go. So you have two different parts. You have the like radical weekend hang out with my friends part of you. You have the gonna go hang out with my parents part of you, look after my little nephew part of you, crush it at work part of you, the dating, flirting part of you. So we have parts to ourselves. And what I would say is to tone, like tone can speak to someone's part. Outfit, style. So like think about what stimulates someone. Visual stimulation, verbal stimulation, I guess emotional stimulation. And then you have figurative stimulation. So like a concept when you get an aha moment or the penny drops in your mind, like goosebumps. Like these things need to be distinctive. And if you're inconsistent with those distinctive triggers or mechanisms, you look like a crazy person. You're unclear. You're unsafe. It's like when you hang out with their friends and they're constantly flipping personalities, constantly talking about things that are irrelevant and confusing. You just don't want to hang out with them. I think a lot of people on social media just scramble and it's unclear. They're undefined. They're undistinctive. And I think they do that because they're just trying to find out what the algorithm wants. If they just focus on studying the greats and identifying what works for them and their style, Grant Cardone figured out what works for him. You figured out what works for you. And you don't have to be like Hormozi. You don't have to be like Gary Vee. And I think this is why Gary's like, you are your niche. He's like, just be you. But like, you still also have to get clear on what that is and whether it works or not. I'll give you one last example. So like if I'm on a sales call, people call me the smiling assassin. So on a sales call, I have to, in many cases, talk to corporations. I oftentimes I'm in a boardroom and there's like 16 people, the company's worth $400 million. And I'm trying to tell them why I'm the guy that should solve their branding problems, right? Like, what does this guy know about, his hat and his pair of pants? How can he help our corporation? You know what I mean? So I have to use a tone that's like, guys, I'm here to help. I'm here to support you. I'm here to get to the resolution. But we need to talk about the numbers. So like I'm smiling, but I'm hitting them with a tone that's like slightly serious, but I'm taking the edge off by smiling and using friendly, calming, approachable body language. There's like layers to this. So like, and then again, if I'm hanging out with my kids, I'm not doing that. I'm not smiling at my kids and like telling them what to do around the house, but you have to figure out what are the mechanisms that you as a character has to put together to get the audience reaction or to get the sales mechanisms or engagement that you want. But back to the smiling assassin thing is I have to use tone because I have to take the edge off, but I have to be like, we're seriously solving a problem here, but I'm not going to be a dick about it. So we're going to have fun and we're going to enjoy the process.
So much wisdom there and a lot of insights to unpack for our own personal brands. And just to clarify, is this book called No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model?
Exactly right. And you might say, well, what the hell has that got to do with branding? So that book, I think what it is like, I don't know if you study like Carl Jung or like psychology or NLP or anything of that nature, but all human beings have trauma, every single one of us. And that trauma shows up in our personality traits and how we show up in day-to-day life. And again, it's like when you are like, I want to start making content, but I'm scared. And then you start thinking about people are going to judge me. I'm going to get bullied. I'm going to get ridiculed. They're going to laugh at me. And like, that's trauma coming up from your childhood, from your parents, or what have you. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like we've had terrible experiences in life. And later on in life, when you want to become a content creator, that trauma tends to show up. And when I do workshops or in-person events, everyone's talking about branding and content. And under the hood, they're actually coming to terms with their trauma. And I think that's a great book for anyone who's looking at building personal brand to understand, hey, what part of you wants to make content? But what part of you is holding you back? And how do you get those two to hang out?
Here we are, 2025. We're going deep on this branding conversation, and we'll of course link this stuff up in the show notes. This is the #1 bestseller in NLP psychotherapy, over 3,880 reviews. Looks like a legendary book and powerful tie-in to how we could all grow in this area. Okay, we're actually going to get into the brand fundamentals. I mean, I actually kind of want to get a definition of branding. Think about some of the next steps that we can do in regards to making a 90-day push to updating our brand. I do want to encourage people to check out Dain's book, which we will also link up in the show notes, the 90-day brand plan. And we'll talk about that later. But before we get there, one last kind of question in the introduction, and as far as my notes go, so we're really still just getting started, you're great at creating content, especially Instagram. You used to really be, that was sort of like you mentioned, you were the content guy. Now you're the brand guy, but you focus heavily on creating shareable content that triggers emotional responses. Do you have a framework, or how do you try to do this consistently? And obviously, listening to this podcast, we can extrapolate that to be thinking maybe more about, man, is this content shareable? How can we trigger emotions? Give us a few tips here.
Yeah, great question. Like, again, like I think when it comes to content creation, it's all emotional. If you go through TikTok, if you go through YouTube, if you go through X, if you go through Instagram, just look at the reshares and look at the comment section of the most viral content that shows up on your feed. Like right now, I don't know if you've seen what's going on in New Jersey with all of the lights in the sky and everyone's freaking out about it. So like, there tends to be, whether we look at media or news, or whether we look at politics, or whether we look at content creation, it always comes back to emotionally led content. The news and politics are great at this. They sensationalize things that may be mundane or normal. They make the everyday thing seem like an exceptionally negative thing that you need to be focusing on. So when you're making content, if you inject a bit of sensationalism around the emotion behind what it is you're talking about, it makes it all that more attractive to share with others. So we tend to share things that emotionally grip us. If we see a phenomenal movie, you have to see this movie. If we go, Kendrick's just dropped a new album, it's fire, you have to send it to your friends because you've emotionally reacted to it. So we tend to share what makes us emotional with those that we want to share our emotions with. So if you look at content, it's no different. Like, content essentially is just the social landscape of people sharing their emotions with each other, full stop. You can be like, I'm sharing wisdom and knowledge. Nope. At the end of the day, we do everything pretty much led through our emotions. The framework I use for this is there's kind of 7 key emotions that tend to get the most viral traction when you share content. And those 7 things are...
Hey, we're about to get back into the podcast in just a second, but I have a question for you. Do you want to grow your personal brand this year? Do you need more leads and sales in your business? If the answer is yes, then right now is the best time to go all in on YouTube. Today's podcast is brought to you by thinkmasterclass.com, where you can get on-demand access to a 1-hour deep dive training revealing how to start and grow a profitable YouTube channel this year. For a limited time, you can get access to this on-demand class entirely for free, where you will learn the 3 biggest mistakes that people make when starting a YouTube channel, the new rules and changes that have been happening on YouTube and how you can use them to create an unfair advantage, and the exact strategy we use at Think Media to generate over 350,000 organic views every single day. The data is clear. 70% of viewers claim that YouTube makes them more aware of new brands. So don't wait any longer to start growing your brand and business with YouTube. Just go to thinkmasterclass.com to get access to this no fluff, highly tactical, free on-demand training. That's thinkmasterclass.com.
Essentially, number one, and we'll just get this out of the way, is like sex. Things that are provocative, things that are promiscuous or sexy tend to get attention, tend to get shit. Not particular for myself, but hey, it exists. It's out there. Number two is like really thinking about things that are like hilarious or humorous or funny, or it just make you laugh. Like Mr. Beast is just funny. Like I like watching his content. I think David Goggins personally is funny. It just makes me feel good. I just like, damn, this guy's just humorous. Even though he's being deadpan serious, I kind of get a kick out of it, right? Super shareable. Next is like things that are inflammatory. So things that like, might trigger an argument. We can think of certain characters in the world right now that when they say or share an opinion, there's two camps. There's a camp that's for them and the camp that's against them. Doesn't matter. That debate is interesting. Again, a lot of emotion there. People like to argue. People like to debate. But most people aren't into the inflammatory piece. Next is things that are like strange or weird or odd. Like when you watch a piece of content, you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like you see Mr. Beast doing something like he's like, we're going to surround this Lamborghini with stuff that this guy spent $10,000 on at Walmart to try to protect the Lamborghini. If he wins, he gets to keep the Lamborghini. Like, what? Like, this is strange. Like, what the hell you want to watch? Then we go into things that are like prolific. So they give you goosebumps. It's like Simon Sinek talking about, start with why in his TED talk. It's just like deep. It's immersive. It's like interesting. It's intimate. And then lastly, it's like looking at things that are aspirational, like feats of strength, like Red Bull doing stunts. It's like, the things that give you a sense of before and after. Like, here's a story of poverty and now they're rich. Like, we like the stories of aspiration. If you just look at the reshares, look at these 7 things and ask yourself, what cocktail of these things is in that piece of content that made it go viral? Is it sex mixed with humor? Is it humor mixed with aspiration? Is it weird and prolific? Is it, weird and aspirational? Like usually it's a mixture. Then you add a character, then you add a theme, then you add, an audience that it's targeted to. Then you have a viral piece of content. So when people say to me, you can't create virality, I'm like, yes, you can. Look at Liquid Death. Look at Mr. Beast. They know emotion sells content. And if you can get really good at understanding human psychology, like with that book I shared with you, and understand how humans actually react emotionally to everything, you can start to get pretty damn good at content if you can understand how human beings react.
Man, I'm loving this. This is genius stuff. But I got 6 of the 7 emotions. So there's one more. Which one are we missing?
Oh, I'm sorry. The last one is danger. Things that are like terrifying. They could maybe trigger vertigo. When you're watching someone like fly down a mountain on a mountain bike, you're like, oh my God, like this person could like fall off the cliff, or they're snowboarding off a cliff or something nuts. I think danger tends to get our attention. It's like when you're, driving on a highway, you see a car accident, you're like, oh, danger. Like it just seems to get our attention. So however you mix these together, this tends to be the human, I guess, emotional responses that get the most sensationalized reaction. And the news tend to work really hard on danger. Like this is like danger here, danger there. It just keeps you locked in and focused. And I think it's a primal reaction. These emotions tend to drive our behavior in many ways.
It's really fascinating. And I am curious though, because you're saying we can really architect virality if we mix these emotions, have a character, a theme, and an audience. But a lot of people listening might be thinking, okay, though, in maybe a business context, I'm not going to do something dangerous. I could pull some of these in maybe. And maybe also viral isn't the only goal. Of course, I want the views, but I also want the right views that are going to lead to leads and customers. So if you were to apply this to kind of your average everyday person who's a little bit stuck on like, almost like I don't want to do these. Like, I don't necessarily want to go inflammatory. I'm not funny. I'm not taking my shirt off and starting an OnlyFans. Maybe prolific because I've built thought leadership, and maybe aspirational because aspirational for what I've achieved as a mom, aspirational for what I've achieved as a business owner. Maybe I'm trying to show that off as building a family. There could be practical things. Just like pull this in And maybe I don't go viral, but I'm still getting more into this emotional led mindset of the content that I'm doing.
You make a good point there, and I think that you can take all of these to an extreme. But if you look at sex, it's like you're attractive, therefore people are just more likely to subconsciously pay attention to what you're saying, right? Or humor might just be you're kind of joyful or cheeky or a little playful. You know what I mean? Like you just dial it back a little bit. You don't have to be a hilarious comedian. You could just be like, oh, this guy's kind of interesting and kind of looking at it in an interesting light. Weird or strange could be like you're wearing a quirky outfit, you have an interesting background, you have a hat that says think on it. Like that's interesting. Like what's that about? And then inflammatory might be like you're a little challenging. You're like, well, give me the better answer here. So, okay, like a little inflammatory. Or you might even say like when it comes back to danger, it's like, hey, the 3 things to avoid when you're building a business. Oh, what are the things I need to avoid? Sounds a little dangerous. So it could be a little, it could be a lot. You know what I mean? We don't have to turn the spice all the way up to ghost pepper. It's like you just have a little sprinkle of a little bit of something in there. It has to be emotional. And these tend to be the emotions that get the most traction. If you were to engineer virality, I, for one, don't like trying to chase virality. I like to make content that I think is interesting and that can genuinely help people. But I understand that if I was to be like, hey, this is how you build a brand. A, you do this. B, you do this. C, you do this. Or if I say, hey, the 3 mistakes you definitely don't want to make when you're starting your brand, you're like, ooh, okay, a little bit of danger. Tell me more. So you just need to add a bit of drama or a bit of sensationalism, just a little bit to your content to make it a little bit more fascinating, a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And this could be the very missing piece. You're listening to this right now of why you're struggling to get views or why you're struggling to break through. Dain, you just said a quote. It has to be emotional. And I think 99% of creators actually are not sitting down and thinking about what emotions am I tapping into? How am I tapping into this? I mean, your thought leadership is clear. I've never heard anybody say that content is the social landscape of people sharing emotions. And it's an entirely different paradigm shift, which is going to be so helpful to us at the Think Media podcast, creating content in this year and beyond. All right. Well, we've covered a lot, but I do want to unpack a few next steps for branding. And we're already halfway into this conversation, but I think branding is so weird for people because they're like, is it just mean I have a good logo? Does it mean, is it my slogan? And so there's like your brand, your branding, your brand strategy, your brand identity. So what is your definition of brand?
That's a great question. It often gets confused, and a lot of experts and talking heads can be like, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. Whatever I say here, people are going to challenge it. But there's a definition I like to adhere to, and it's pretty close to academia, pretty close to what you would see as a discussion, between executives at Nike and Pepsi and so on. And I guess the zeitgeist in the upper stratosphere of branding and in the upper echelons tends to be this. Your brand is what your market says or thinks you are. So like your opinion of me and my opinion of you, like that's our version of each other's brands. What do you think of Liquid Death? I put a Liquid Death can in front of people. I like to just watch their reaction. Some people go, whoa, what is this? I've never seen this before. Is this a beer? I'm like, it's water. And they're like, what? Sometimes I put it in front of people like, God, what is that? I'm like, it's just water. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Like people have a visceral, immediate reaction just to a graphic design style. So design style can elicit brands. Tonality can elicit brands. My outfit can tell you about who I am. You walk into a room, you scan people's outfits, you judge who they are. That's their brand in your head. You decide what the world's brands are to you. Eye of the beholder. For me, for someone to sit in front of me and go, my brand's this, I'm like, cool, but tell me what your market think it is. Well, the market think it's great. Show me proof. Show me receipts. Give me testimonials. Give me quotes. So I sit down with companies all the time. They sit down in front of me to do our strategy sessions and they say to us, we have a great brand. I'm like, great. Where's your case studies? Where's your testimonials? Oh, we don't have any. Okay, cool. We'll have, what have people said about you? Well, what do you mean? Well, what's people's opinion of your brand? Well, we don't know. It's like, well, your brand isn't what you think it is. It's what your market think it is. And if you don't talk to the market and ask them, hey, what do you think our brand is? You're flying blind. So for me, branding is what the market think you are or think your entity or company or corporation is. Branding is essentially, I like to use a metaphor for what I think branding is. And it's like, well, what's your Mount Everest? Well, I want my agency to be the fastest growing agency in Australia. I want to work with big fashion labels and successful e-commerce brands. I want to have a team of 50 staff. I want to have a really cool, fun culture. And I want to work with like fired up, excitable entrepreneurs. That's my goal. Okay, cool. That's your anchor. You're casting to the top of the mountain. That's the outcome that you want. Branding is climbing to that summit. If we break it down a little further, strategy to me is like what's the route to get there? Like, where's the mile markers? How do I know I'm going to hit them? How do I implement it? How do I make sure it happens and have accountability for that system? And then the brand tactics is like, well, what are those actions? What tools do I need? What channels am I distributing them through? And how do I make that happen? And brand identity is the visual identity that elicits those outcomes. So if I produce a piece of content, or I put a product on a shelf, or I build a website, the proclivity that people have when they immediately see the visual design and then they read the copywriting, they're making a decision in their head. So very much you're left with design and verbal language to train your audience to think of your brand the way you want them to think of it. So you know how I said earlier, I had social media content, but every piece of content said how to build Instagram, how to grow Instagram, how to design Instagram content. People see that messaging, they see the design, they decide, oh, Dain's the Instagram guy. So how you kind of sprinkle your touch points into the marketplace elicits the brands. But most cases, people don't have a brand. And this is what I mean. If you sat down with your target audience, and I'm going to talk about personal branding, I'm talking maybe from more a company perspective. If you have a service or you have a product and you survey 10 people that purchase said service or product and ask them how to describe it, and they describe the features and benefits of the product, you don't have a brand. If they talk about the experience and how it felt and what it meant to them, you have a brand. This is the zeitgeist that I tend to sit in, which is like, if you can figure out how to understand, well, what is your branding destination? What would you like people to say your brand is when you get there? What the tactics and the strategy is along the way, and how to figure out how to get this whole thing to work together. And it's not easy. That's what I tend to say is like, if you can get good at those things or have someone on your team who's good at those things, you're going to have a lot better success growing your company.
So I want to unpack, this is powerful. Your brand is what the market says about you. Then your branding, how do you want to be positioned? Then your brand strategy, what's the roadmap to get there, as well as tactics, the actual activities and things you do. Brand identity then breaks down into the visuals, things people see, and the writing, which may also just in video, especially show up as language, the way you talk, what you say. So many people listening to this, though, are starting. They're maybe kind of on the sidelines making their plan. They're in an early stage. They're also just trying to figure things out. And so this question of like, what does the market say about you? It's like, well, nothing. I don't have a market yet. I don't even really have even maybe an initial audience, or it's not a big enough case study, or I have a viral short. And even by viral, we say VFM, viral for me. I had a YouTube short get 22,000 views. Well, vertical content, that's cool. And it's a really cool milestone, but like, that's not impact. That's not like a level of depth of people would recognize you. They're recognizing your logo. Some people listening to this, one of my biggest pet peeves, man, their YouTube avatar is still the letter of their name. Like, I'm offended personally for everybody, especially if you're on the YouTube channel. Today, you need to actually like at least get that figured out, and then get Dain's book to even take it to another level to figure out really what that should be. But apply this a little bit if you're not a corporation and you're a new personal brand. Maybe you're also a successful business owner. You got a product and service. You've scaled to 6 figures, multiple 7 figures, but your brand sucked the whole way. Like, you didn't really need a brand, like, because you had a good product and there's some word of mouth, but your messaging wasn't super clear, but the product solved a problem. So if you're at a place where like, man, I can't get much feedback here, how do you start dialing this in, and how do you think about this?
Yeah, you raised a good point there. So I'm going to hit this 3 different ways. 1 is with a metaphor, 2 is with logic, and then 3 is maybe a few things that people can do. So first and foremost, like, I guess the metaphor here is like, if you're starting, essentially you have to kind of imagine yourself like a coming of age, right? So like, it's like moving out from your parents' house for the first time. It's terrifying. Like, oh, I got to pay rent, I got to organize food, I got to do my own dishes, I got to do my own washing. Like, it's overwhelming the amount of stuff you have to do to like have a social channel that starts to get traction. But what you have to do is get obsessed with like finding ways to enjoy it. That's the first step. But to get over the fear, it's almost like I liken it to stepping out to the wilderness with a survival pack and going, I'm just going to go trudge out into the wilderness that is social media and find a spot to set up, right? My initial spot, camp, I metaphorically set up. I was like, I'm going to set up a camp and a little campfire here, which was like, I'm going to teach people how to make Instagram content. I thought I was a genius. I'm going to teach Instagram content and how to do it on Instagram. I'm like, who on Instagram doesn't want to learn this stuff? I was like, I'm a genius. Let's do it. And it worked, but it didn't get the reaction that I wanted. We'll come back to this when I go into, I guess, breaking it into logic. So back to the metaphor. You're stepping out into the wilderness. You're setting up a campfire. We talk about this in the book. And it's like, well, every campfire that you create one day could become an empire. But for sure, every empire that exists once upon a time was a campfire. So if you look at the great city of Rome, once upon a time, people showed up, put a little campfire in the ground and were like, this is a great place to hang out. And then that turned into Rome. So if you're trying to create your Rome, understand that it always starts with literally a campfire. Maybe in the modern age, maybe not, but like if we use the medieval concept, let's just stay there. So for the sake of this, imagine building a personal brand, like stepping out to the wilderness, picking a spot, just anywhere, just pick a camp to be like, this is good enough for now. Let's just set up. We might move later. Let's just try this. Set up a little campfire. The metaphor of the campfire is you producing heat to attract people to go, ooh, this is kind of cool. This is entertaining. This is exciting. What's going on over here? A little bit of content. And every time you put a log on the fire, that's a piece of content. And the only way to stoke the brand fire is to put a log on the fire consistently. If you stop putting logs on the fire, you stop producing content, you're never going to produce enough heat to build an audience, to build a tribe, to build an empire. So if you could just get comfortable just going, hey man, I'm not alone. I'm just going to keep adding logs to the fire. No one sees it. So what? I'm learning how to chop wood. I'm learning what types of wood I want to use. I'm learning how it kind of creates a reaction. Different wood creates different heat. Different wood lasts longer than others. You're just getting comfortable with the process. Before long, people start to show up and go, hey, we're kind of lost out here in the wilderness. This is kind of cool. Can we hang out here? You're like, sure. They grab a seat. What happens is the bigger the campfire gets, the more heat it produces, the more entertaining you are, the more, I guess, bells and whistles that your brand has, the more attractive your campsite becomes. And you can amplify your campsite by collaborating with others. We're collaborating right now. Like your campfire, your audience that are listening to this, who love you, who love hanging around your campfire, getting nourishment and insights and entertainment from you. Like, who's the hell is this Dain guy? Now there's a pathway between the listeners of this podcast back to potentially my podcast or my event or my book or whatever I'm doing. We're creating a pathway between us. And you have to look at building a personal brand like building a business. You have to find other people to collaborate with. You have to find events to go to and collect a new audience to say, I got a campfire if you want to come hang out at it. Before long, if you get good at building a campfire, you can turn it into a business. And the metaphor here is like, essentially build a campfire first, get good at making content, get good at creating a social contract and emotionally engaging with your audience. And then they'll tell you, we're hungry. They're like, great, I can sell you something. What do you want? You want a burger? You know what I mean? So like, do you want to sell a book? Do you want to sell a course? Do you want to like, don't start with the sale. Don't get out there in the wilderness and be like, what am I going to sell? There's no one out there. Like start a campfire first, build an audience first and allow the audience to tell you, dude, we would really like it if you wrote us a book. Dain, we'd really like it if you created a podcast. All right, here you go. We would really like it, Dain, if you created us a course about how to build a personal brand. Okay, well, here you go. Hey, Dain, we'd really like it if like you could come out to the US and like do some speaking and some events. All right, here you go. So like I've never decided. I've just allowed my audience to demand what they wanted and I just give it to them. Christo does the exact same thing. He's like, I just make content. I wait till the audience react. I give what they want. So that's the metaphor. The logic to this is that when you start making content, you're just trying to get data. Like, don't worry about going viral or getting a fan base. Just like produce a piece of content, look at the data. The data is they like this piece, they didn't like that piece. They commented on this, they shared that, but they didn't like this. You're just collecting data. Then you try to build enough data. 1 week of content isn't a lot of data. 2 weeks of content is a lot of data. 2 months content isn't really a lot of data. I think the reason I chose 90 days for the book was it's enough time to create enough data and create enough momentum. The data is, well, how many people followed? How many people engage? What do they engage with? You just start to look at the numbers and the statistics. Then the information above that is like, well, okay, they like this. What are the actionable insights? Well, the actionable insights are the data to the information to the insights is if I make more of that, I get a better outcome. Okay, cool. Let's do more of that. Then you learn, okay, well, out of doing more of that, this one did even better. So the only way to go from data to wisdom is to look at the data, come up with the information, get insights from that information, do something about it, and go through this cycle of like action, learn, action, learn, action, learn. If you do that for 90 days, at the end of it, you'll have a little bit of wisdom. You're like, okay, like I think my audience kind of like this. I got some wisdom about how to solve their problem. I got some wisdom about what products I could create next. But you can't go from nothing to wisdom. You have to go through these layers of collecting data, making sense of the information, choosing the insights that matter, taking action of those insights, learning what does and doesn't work. That's the only way to get to wisdom.
Man, this is rich. And you're making complex things simple with this campfire analogy. I think Media podcast listeners, this podcast is really a blueprint. And I want to challenge us to really commit to the next 90 days whenever you're listening to this, especially those that are on the sidelines. 1 week's not enough. 2 weeks is not enough. A lot of people make New Year's resolutions, but they only get 3 weeks in. They don't even get enough momentum or enough data. So if you're listening to this right now, I just want to encourage you. We're going to get to a little bit more from the book in a bit, but pick up the book, make a plan, and really commit to 90 days of putting logs on the fire so that you also can get some data, so you can get some wisdom. And so you don't have to overthink about why didn't this work in month 1 or even month 2, but give yourself enough time to either commit or recommit to starting your channel, because there's so much wisdom here. And I do want to get to a little bit of the 90-day framework as we land the plane in a moment. But I want to ask you, personal brands versus corporate brands. And business owners that listen to this podcast sometimes even wonder, should they even be a personal brand? Should they hire somebody else in the company or appoint someone else to be on camera? There's a lot of different approaches. But you say that personal brands build trust faster than corporate brands because they're about character, while corporate brands are about capability. Can you explain what this is and why this matters?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, like whatever it is that we do, we tend to fall in love with people and human beings. And then if we look at human beings have a few things. One is they have a story. They have an origin story. They had a defining moment. They have the trajectory that their life is on. They have enemies. They have friends. They have catchphrases. They have outfits. They have tonality. They have color. It's difficult for a company to have those things. And this is why you see a Nike partner with a Michael Jordan. Or this is why you see famous celebrities like Tom Segura partnering with Liquid Death. Like, you can use a person as an emotional extension to your brand to add a sense of personality, right? Harley Davidson's the rebel. Google's the sage, right? Companies tend to have personality. And I think the reason that we're more attracted to people and their character than we are to a company's capability, well, I don't need a company's capability every day, but I like connecting with people every day. You know what I mean? So I would say that if you were to say, which one do you need? In today's day and age, the landscape is changing. And what I've been witness to in the landscape is I've been working with entrepreneurs for about 10 years. And when I started the company 5 years ago, working with business owners, the conversation was, hey, what's the deal with personal branding? 3 years ago, it was, should I start a personal brand? 2 years ago, it was, hey, I'm thinking about starting a personal brand. And today, most entrepreneurs are like, I got to build a personal brand. So like the landscape's changed because people are starting to realize that these kids on social media, millennials or whatever, are making more money than them, and they've been in an industry for a decade or more. Like, how the hell is this guy on YouTube making more money than me? And I've been doing this for 10 years. The point is, business owners are realizing that people that make media and produce content as a personal brand are stealing their clients. They're taking the market by storm, because 5 years ago, we spent a lot of time on social media, but today we spend our lives on social media. And I think the social transaction between people is predominantly online. And those that win online are going to win at business. You can't just win business by word of mouth anymore. So to really break these apart, is personal branding is a lot more about character. It's a lot more about style and presence and story, Whereas companies are typically about capability, outcomes, and producing some kind of, product or service in the market. It's not always interesting to look at products and services. No one goes on Instagram to follow companies. People go on Instagram, they go on TikTok, they go on YouTube to engage with content from people that they align with. And there's really only two reasons that we're really attracted to personal brand is human beings like to be around people that they like and that feel like they are like them. This is why you have a right and a left in politics is people like, I align this way or I align that way or I'm a centralist or whatever it is. Like we tend to hang out with those we see the world the same way with. The second thing is we follow personal brands because we want to be like them. You follow Alex Hormozy or Gary Vee or Chris Do because you're like, man, I want to be like that guy or that girl. Like we have a part of ourselves that aspires to be more, so that we're attracted to that. Companies just can't really do the same thing. So if you're looking for an edge or an advantage on social media, you need to think about how do I create founder-led content about the company that I'm building. And an example of this is a guy named Poor Boy Coffee. There's a guy who started a channel. He had a cafe. It wasn't making money. So he started making content about how much money he was losing. Then he started making content about how much it costs for the beans and how he was just a warm, interesting, wholesome guy. And he's kind of humorous, kind of self-deprecating, back to the emotion piece. And he's just aspirational. It's just I want the guy to win. So what happened is, if you go to his social channel now, when he opens the door in the morning, he has a line out the door. He's making content about all these rad people that are supporting him. And I was like, oh, I'm making a little bit of profit now. I can buy a better machine now. And people are rooting for this character. We love stories. There's something in us that is, whether it's our ancestors sitting around a campfire, we love stories. We love human beings. And I think if you want an unfair advantage over your competition, and if you want to steal your competitor's lunch and eat it in front of them, you need to learn how to maybe use a personal brand.
Poor Boy Coffee looks like he's got 59,000 followers on Instagram now. I think I found him, poorboy.coffee.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And what a cool story. There's so many nuggets in there and things we can apply to our personal brands. And if you have a more business brand, when you were talking about Nike, it just made me think that influencer marketing is not new.
It's not. It's been around since ancient times, man. The word influence is just a new buzzword that we use to describe what is it that makes it so that person can influence an outcome. And the word influencer isn't even cool anymore. It's now about founder-led content. That's the new thing. It's they're a founder. So I think it's not new. We've been following what others do since ancient times. Cleopatra wears that type of makeup. I'm going to wear that type of makeup, right? It's the Caesars dress a certain way. I'm going to dress a certain way. We tend to be influenced by the zeitgeist of our cultures, the populace that we live in. And it's like a hedonic treadmill. We tend to be like that which is around us. You hang around people that complain and bemoan all the time, you start to complain and bemoan. You hang around with a Grant Cardone long enough, you start to get a little bit of energy, you start to sell stuff. We need to put ourselves in positions of success. And if you're not getting the success you want on your social channels, on your Instagram and your business, put yourself in an environment around people that are doing it and crushing it. We need to be close to people. And those, I think, that have the most success in business are the most obsessed with building relationships with valuable people.
Let's talk about the 90-day framework. So as we kind of land the plane, give us some next steps now. First 30 days, 30 to 60, final sprint. People can pick up your book, highly recommended, and definitely save this podcast and, work through all of these because my hope and intent here was that we all level up our brands. If you are established, I know I got work to do. If you are just starting, now you have a roadmap. But what could happen for your brand, for your reach of your content, for your income, if you dialed in some of these details over the next 90 days? I love books personally, buy so many of them because it's actually pretty wild for, $20, $30, how much wisdom you can get from somebody and how impactful it can be. That's a 10x return, 100x return, 1,000x return of the wisdom you can have in a book when it's applied. But if you kind of just walk us through 90 days, what are we actually going to be doing over the next 90 days? and some milestones we could aim for, at least at a high level. And then again, in the show notes is a copy of the book if you want to order that on Amazon. And we'll come back to some final resources that Dain has as well. Talk about the 90 days.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I'm going to steal your plane analogy and kind of play with that a little bit. And also, like, I noticed you got a hammer on your wall there, so I'm going to use that. So I think there's this cliche or this phrase. It's like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Like if all you're focused on is like, I need leads, then social media just looks like a platform to get leads on. Like you need to stop looking at social media like a platform to generate leads on. You need to go, okay, this is a public library, and people either want to get entertainment, they want to get Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, or they want to educate themselves on like mathematics or science, or people either want to learn or they want to entertain themselves, or a mix of the two. No one's going to the public library to get sold to or to become your lead. So if you start respecting social media, it's social and it's media. So if you go, okay, how do I make something that's sociable and how do I make something that's media centric? Just sit in that pocket. The second thing is, if you look at the 90-day brand plan, like taking off in a plane. So imagine you're sitting in the cockpit on the runway of a Boeing 747. You're the pilot. This is what it feels like to start your 90-day brand plan. Now, it's the first time you're in that plane. You've never flown a plane before. And to make it even worse, the windshield's painted black. And it's your job to take off. This is what it feels like. You're like, oh my God, is it going to work? Am I going to crash and burn? Am I going to die? Like, people literally think they're going to die if they just start posting content. So what I suggest to them is, like, what happens is if you're in that cockpit and your family are on board and they're depending on you to succeed. I kind of play these games with myself because it makes life a bit more interesting and colorful. But if you're taking off down the runway, taxiing down the runway, this is what I want you to expect for the first 30 days. The first 30 days of you producing content is you just taxiing to get to the start of the runway. You know, when you get on the flight and you're like driving, it feels like you're driving around a car park and you're like, oh, are we going to take off anytime soon? Like, you need to taxi to the runway. The first 30 days is like, you're like, when are we going to take off? Like, what's happening? Like, nothing seems to be getting any traction. Where are the clouds? You can't expect clouds in 30 days. So just imagine the first 30 days is we're just taxiing to the start of the runway. I'm just going to produce content. Hey, we're moving. We boarded the flight. We're moving. We'll get there eventually. We'll take off at some point. I'll get a hot towel and an orange juice at some point. But let's just focus on producing content. Now, the point is, you just want to get in the operating rhythm of producing a piece of content, posting it, looking at the data. Forget about the results. Producing another piece of content, putting it up, look at the data. Who cares about the results? Just get in the rhythm of being comfortable being on camera, or becoming comfortable creating a piece of content. Become comfortable writing a caption and choosing the hashtags. Just get comfortable. And if you're terrified of what people think, just create a private channel, invite a couple of people you love and trust, make it private, and don't make it public. And if you can't even do that, just film yourself every day for 30 days. Whatever your taxiing down the runway is, just start. Like, that's the point. It's just to get out of procrastination and get into the action. Get out of the data and information and into taking action, because the only way you can learn is through action. Okay. So just don't expect much in 30 days other than like, I'm getting comfortable. Oh shit, we're at the start of the runway. The plane engine's roaring. It's getting loud. Your windshield's painted black. You're like, I don't know where the tree line is. I don't know if we're going to make it. But at some point, you can't gingerly hit that runway. At some point, once you get comfortable, you have to start taking it serious. You go, okay, we can't gingerly hit this runway. It's pedal to the metal, baby. And you want to hit that thing as hard as you can, as consistently as you can. And if you're going hard in the paint, and what I mean by going hard is, like, don't just give him a random piece of content that you just thought of that morning. Like, try to give him something really good. The internet's full of great education, great entertainment. Like, try to make something that's worthy of being on Netflix or worthy of being paid for. Like, make it that good and make it that interesting. If you're pushing that hard, you're going to start getting wind under your wings, and it might take another 30 days to get off the runway. 90 days tends to be the amount of time that most algorithms need to get acquainted with your content formats. It tends to be enough time for your community to get comfortable with what your deal is, what your shtick is all about. You need to expect it to take 3 months to even start to get altitude. Because here's the thing, the 747 depletes about 40% of its fuel to 60% of its fuel just to get off the runway and up to altitude. So think about this. Next time you're on a flight, dude, like by the time you're at altitude,
70%?
yeah,
70%.
up to
Wow.
70%. Yeah. So up
Yeah.
to 70% of the fuel in the flight could be gone when you're at altitude. So remember, the next time you hit altitude, 70% of the fuel, gone, right? But you can go halfway around the planet on that other 30%. The point is, when you're at scale like you or I am, it becomes a lot easier. It's like, oh, this is almost autopilot. I can hire people to come in and help me do this. I can run my company. This is fucking fun as, like, no, nothing to stress about. It's the beginning that's terrifying. Most of the work for the pilot is in the takeoff and in the landing. So most of your work that you'll ever do in creating social media content is in the first probably 12 months. Like, you got to give it everything. You got to give it enough momentum. And if you're not posting every day or 5 days a week, you're just not going to have enough momentum to ever get off the runway.
So that's such a great vision. And I think, man, when we compare ourselves to others, which is not a good idea, but we do it. And, my friend John Acuff says, don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle, because what we see is the person that's getting the views and the shares, and like they're 1 year in, 5 years in, 10 years in. And then we're 2 weeks in and we're like, man, this isn't working. And I really felt the emotions when you're talking about taxiing, because not only do I feel like, man, when are we going to take off? But anyone who's flown has maybe been in a situation where something happens. They're like, sorry, guys, we're out here. There's a few other things. Sorry. And like sometimes it's an extra 30, 45 minutes, an extra hour. And you're like, what's going on? In fact, I've spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, and sometimes you're sitting on the runway and it's 107 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, sorry, guys. And they're like, no matter how hard the AC is blowing, you're just getting destroyed. They're like, please keep the windows down. And that's sometimes kind of how it feels at the start of posting content. You're just like, man, when is this thing going to take off? And even the fact that we got to burn so much fuel to even get a little bit of altitude. Well, of course, you get much more tactical in the book. And so we'll I encourage listeners to pick that up. And I am actually curious as well. Clearly, you're a student, you're a learner, you're a reader. I'm just curious if there's other business marketing or strategy books that, especially for content creators, if you had a friend that you were like, oh man, you want to start a YouTube channel and you want to get into this creator economy thing and you want to have a personal brand, and these are some of the books that I think would really be helpful from any angle, really. Is there anything that are some of your favorites?
Yeah, some personal favorites that I like. I like the 10X rule. That book means a lot to me, and I think it's a very simple book. But I guess Grant Cardone, who wrote that book, just talks about like you have to think 10 times bigger than you're currently thinking, and you have to think it's going to be 10 times harder than you think it is to get there. It's just coming to the terms with the reality that you're probably not thinking big enough, and you're probably not thinking it's as hard as it actually is going to be. Like, taxiing down that runway is hard. Posting content every day, and your mom's the only person that comments, sucks. And then you go to work, and your friends are making fun of you for making content. It's brutal, but you just have to realize that like the only way to get off the runway is just keep doing it. And like if you look at a Gary Vee or a Hormozi, they're in their private jet at like 80,000 feet, going into the stratosphere, sipping on champagne. And you're not seeing the 16 years it took them to get to that point. So like, again, you can't compare your start to someone else's middle. Like that's crazy. But I think, in any case, when you're trying to build something, you got to realize like it's got to be tough. Another book I like is Zag from a guy named Marty Neumeier. Zag was Steve Jobs' favorite book. And some say it inspired him to create the iPod, but basically that book just says what everyone else is doing, do the opposite. If everyone's doing talking head content, go do something different. If you look at anyone who gets crazy viral traction, it's usually like the market's going this way and they just go, I'm doing the opposite. Everyone's serious about business, I'm going to be nuts about business. Everyone's formal, I'm going to wear a beanie and sneakers. Like whatever the zeitgeist is, try to hit a different direction. Another book, I think, what I'm enjoying at the moment is Buy Back Your Time from Dan Martell. Recently, I had the privilege of meeting him. Just a great way to get unstuck and just figure out like, we need to take action. We need to start thinking about like, how do I use time as an investment? Am I using my time wisely? Am I putting it in the right place? The last book I would say that's kind of a hidden gem is The Richest Man in Babylon. A great book about how money works. Um, no matter how many times I read that book, it just hits me different. And it's a really old book. A lot of people don't realize how actually old that book is. But it just teaches you that money has the way of working, and if you can get familiar with how money kind of operates and how to handle it, if you can think bigger, like Grant Cardone, if you can win your time back, like Dan Martell, and if you can do it a little bit differently, like Marty Newmeyer, I think that's a great stack of books to get started.
Oh man, that's the level up list for 2025 plus your 90-day brand plan. And Dane, I'm super grateful for you. I have one more question, but I want you to shout out anything you're doing, the stuff that people could get more from you. What if they want to go deeper? We'll make sure to list all the resources, the books recommended, Dane's stuff in the show notes, but break it down. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, good question, man. You can just go to dainwalker.com or just follow me at Instagram. And my company is rival, rivyl.com. But what I'll do, man, for anyone who's listening to this right now, I'll send you a code and you guys can have my online personal branding program for free. I'll give you a code so that your listeners can just get immediate access to that. It's different to the book. I think, if you wanted to 10 in the book with the online course, go ahead. If you just want to do one or the other, whatever. But yeah, it's about a 4-hour program on actually how to build what I'm talking about.
Dane, that's sick. People are going to be pumped. So you're going to be giving away your personal branding course for free. So if you're on the audio or video podcast, we'll make sure that that code is in the show notes, as well as the website link to get to that, as well as all the other resources. Dane, super grateful for you. The final question is send us off 2025. You're listening to this. What's the mindset you need in this current landscape? You've given us a lot of juicy tips, but if maybe there's a final tip, a perspective shift to crush it this year, especially for those that want to start or grow a profitable YouTube channel, what do you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think something I've been really sitting with recently, and it's helped me a lot, is thinking wildly creative, but being ruthlessly commercial. And trying to find a way to make the two meet in the middle. Because I think to build a business and to succeed as a personal brand, as a content creator, you have to be wildly creative. And this is what I'm talking about, like engineering emotion, understanding the zeitgeist of what's popular in pop culture right now, and leveraging that, trying to stay away from what everyone else is doing and doing something different. Like, try to be wildly creative, but also be ruthlessly commercial. Like, where is the attention? I want to build a business for startups. Well, why? Because I was a startup and it was hard and it sucked. Well, cool. There's a hole in the market, but is there a market in the hole? Right? Like, sell to the rich. They got money for you. You know what I mean? And take that money and then give something else to those that are getting started. Right? Like, I chase big branding projects that pay me $250,000 to $500,000. And we do other projects that are smaller than that, but that's the ones I'm chasing. And then I'll take that capital and I'll go write books, or I'll give your program or your community a free online program. Like, you know what I mean? So like, if you can go chase where the money really is, you can go do the other things you're passionate about doing. But I just think, yeah, if you want to win, you have to start thinking like an athlete. You have to start thinking like an entrepreneur. And it's like, yep, we could be creative and passionate, but we have to become really commercial, know our numbers, and we have to know how to invest our time and make money with it.
That quote is going to go down in history for the Think Media podcast, because we always live here at this tension of the artist, the creative, but oftentimes the starving artist. And even why our tagline is helping you build a profitable YouTube channel, as I'm always talking about, you need money for the mission. And there's always this tension where sometimes the money and the business acumen and the practicality feels like it, chokes out the creative soul of some. But unfortunately, if all you're trying to do is be an artist and be creative and you run out of cash, then you can't feed yourself, your family, and you can't really scale. And so the tension in the middle, you summed it up for 2025. Think wildly creative, but be ruthlessly commercial. Dain, super grateful for you. Appreciate you taking the time and adding so much value to our community. Want to acknowledge all the value you've put out there in the world, and grateful for all these resources and all your wisdom. Truly grateful and thankful for you to take the time today. And then Think Media Podcast, thank you. As usual, like, share, rate, review. If you're still listening this deep into the podcast, wherever you watch or listen, my name is Sean Cannell, your guide to building a profitable YouTube channel. And we will connect with you in a future episode.